Acrylics have a reputation for being difficult to blend, but all these paintings you see here are acrylics. So why does it feel so hard? In this video, I'll explain the 4 reasons why acrylics seem tricky to blend and how you can overcome each one. The biggest cause, and the one that surprises most beginners, is the paint itself. The most common cause of difficult blending with acrylics is using inexpensive paints. In a recent video, I challenged myself to complete this painting using nothing but the inexpensive craft paints that you would find in a craft store. I actually used 2 different brands. There's the Craftsmart and the Cali Art. These are great for craft projects, but for rendering fine detail and subtle blending effects, you might struggle with them a bit. These paints don't have that much covering power, so it made it a challenge to paint over previously painted areas. And that makes it difficult to create smooth and subtle effects because when you paint over the top of it, some of the previous layers show through. Even though I'm happy with the results, it felt like a struggle at times. It would have been much easier to use professional grade acrylics or even a good brand of student grade acrylics. So paint quality is a big factor. If you're going to use a less expensive paint, I recommend a student grade paint from a good brand. I would use something like the Liquitex Basics or maybe the Galleria line of acrylics from Winsor & Newton. So the one reason why acrylics seem difficult to blend is because they dry so quickly. On one hand, that's an advantage because you can put down layer after layer, but when you're in the middle of blending 2 colors together and it starts to get sticky, that can be frustrating. So there's a couple of different ways to solve that. For one, you can add different retarders to your paint. Here's a slow drying medium from Winsor & Newton. I added it to these 4 different shades of gray, and I used it in this demo on how to paint transparent glass. As I said, you don't need to blend every section of a painting. I mostly used it on the background. Most of the other shapes included flat areas of color, so I didn't use the medium in those sections. There's a link to this video in the related video section in the description below. You can also use satin glazing medium from Golden. They also make it in gloss, so there's some sort of retarder to make it slower drying. I used the satin glazing medium in my video about how to blend student acrylics. I added it to the background color just to make it a little bit easier to blend. The other use for glazing medium is to create subtle, transparent glazes of color. I demonstrated that on the apple. Here's how it looks before I added the glazes, and here's what it looks like after. So that might be another place where you're struggling, is that you're trying to create a perfect blend in one layer. With acrylics, you can easily add layer upon layer, and some of those can be transparent glazes. Some artists swear by the slow dry mediums from Liquitex. This is basically like a gloss medium with retarder added to it. And that's the thing to keep in mind, is there's a difference between mediums and additives. A simple way to think about the difference between a medium and an additive is you can think of the medium as containing glue. It holds everything together. It makes the pigment stick to the canvas that you're painting on. An additive doesn't have any of that glue in there. Most retarder additives have a limit as to how much you can add. Otherwise, it might take a long time to dry, or it could dry tacky. Since the Liquitex blending medium is a mixture of retarder and a medium all in one product, you can add as much as you want, which makes it easier for beginners to get started with, although it will make it more transparent the more that you add. Another option would be to use slow drying acrylics such as the Golden Open Acrylics. The retarder is already added to the paint, but this does dry slower than if you were to take regular acrylics and add retarder to it yourself. Golden also has open thinner, which you can add to your paint to loosen it up. So this comes in handy if a passage is starting to tack up and you could just brush some of this in there. The open thinner is designed to work with open acrylics. You can also use it as a retarder. I read that in their technical data that you could just add a few drops of this to your paint to make it dry a little bit slower. So now that you have an idea of how you can make your paints dry slower, the only thing left is the blending technique, and that's a big part of it. The first thing that I would point out is that you really don't need to do that much blending in your painting. In fact, this painting here has absolutely no blending in it. Up close, you can see that it's just solid shades of color. And when you look at it from a distance, it looks realistic. I simplified the glass into basic shapes and then filled it in with flat areas of color. If you're interested in seeing this entire process, there's a link to this video in the description below. In this example, I used the same technique for this painting, but the difference is I would soften the edges where those shapes would touch. So, for example, I would paint this in as a solid color along with this brown color, and then just soften this edge up. And that creates the illusion of creating a gradient. So the rest of the painting has a lot of flat open areas of color where I didn't blend at all. It also didn't do too much blending in the handle. So what I'm saying is you don't really need to use that much blending in your paintings. For the majority of the painting, you can use a technique like this, and then in certain areas, you can soften the edges and create a smooth gradient. This painting was completed with Liquitex Basics, and in that video, I mentioned that I didn't really do too much blending in some of these areas. Up close, you can see some of these stripes are almost solid areas of color, and maybe there's a little bit of blending between them. And from a distance, it creates the illusion of chrome. Brushes are something you need to consider too. When it comes to blending, the type of brush that you use has an impact on how it turns out. I find that hog bristle brushes don't work that well with acrylics. They have bristles that are too stiff, and they can leave streaks in the paint. I think they work better for oils because the paint is thicker. I mostly use synthetic brushes like this to apply the paint to the canvas. These have nylon bristles, and they work well with water media. These are great for applying the paint to the canvas, but I usually opt for a softer brush, like this mop brush, to do the blending. That's because the bristles are softer and it doesn't disturb the paint as much. Sometimes I'll use it to do circular motions, or I'll go back and forth like this in order to blend the two colors together. When you get too much paint on it, it helps to wipe it off with a paper towel. Acrylic paint can be kind of harsh on paintbrushes. I have an entire video about how to take care of your paintbrushes. I recommend soaps that are non-toxic, and the Master's Brush Cleaner can even remove dry paint. Over the years, I've tried a lot of different acrylics to see how they handle blending. In my video where I use craft paint, I compare swatches of different types of acrylics, such as craft paints, student grade paints, and professional acrylics. The link is in the description below. I recommend that you at least use a good quality student grade acrylic. Here's a brief overview of the paints that I used to make these paintings. So this painting was completed with craft paints. These are the Liquitex student acrylics. I used these golden flute acrylics for the painting of this glass mug. They're thinner than heavy body acrylics, and they don't leave too much texture. Both of these paintings over here are golden open acrylics, which are slow drying acrylic paint. Interactive acrylics are another option. What's different about these is that when they start to tack up, you can lightly mist them with water and it loosens them up. They also have the unlocking formula that can loosen up paint that's been dry to the touch for up to 24 hours. It's basically water and isopropyl alcohol. I never really found that necessary, I just spray it with water. So here's an example of a painting that I did with interactive acrylics, and you can see that the sky has a real nice smooth gradation to it. And here's a couple more. One benefit of interactive acrylics over open acrylics is that you can use them as thick as you want, whereas the open acrylics will remain tacky if you go too thick. If you'd like to see how each of these paints actually performs, I made a whole series of in-depth blending tutorials. You can find them in my acrylic blending playlist, which is linked here and in the description below. I hope these tips help you with your blending. Thanks for watching.